morning. We're good to go. Okay. Well, this is a work session, RAFTA's Destination 2040 Plan and Transit Priorities Project. Ralphie, are you doing this show?
Well, myself and Mr. Blankenship, Mayor Whitsitt, will be ready to go if you're ready.
We are so ready.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm Ralph Trapani with Parsons Transportation Group, and I'm the project manager for a blended team of RAFTA and Parsons people who have been working on an integrated transportation systems plan that's been about 2.5 years now. With me is Dan Blankenship, CEO of RAFTA, and David Johnson, Director of Planning with RAFTA, who's handing things out. So I'm going to jump right in. Welcome to a couple of new members of the board. Please ask questions. There's a lot of material here, and it's a product of a couple of years of work. So let me get going here, make sure that I can run everything. Okay, first of all, who is RAFTA? RAFTA is the second largest transit system in Colorado and the largest rural transit system in the nation. RAFTA services avoided over 11,000 auto trips daily in 2017, so without RAFTA, you can imagine what I-70 and more specifically Highway 82 would look like. RAFTA operates the first rural bus rapid transit system in the United States. That's called the VelociRAFTA system. RAFTA also operates the public bike share program, We Cycle. You folks have got that amenity here. And they also have the Rio Grande Trail, which is an important community asset. At the AM peak, and Tony Kronbergs and I were just talking about this, RAFTA is moving 35 to 38% of all commuters into Aspen, which is a really incredibly impressive transit rideshare. That's better than the New York subways do, going into Manhattan in the mornings. Another important aspect of the RAFTA program is the non-driving mode share, which is walking, biking, and transit. In our region is approximately 30%, which is double the national average. So RAFTA services a very willing population, let me put it at that. So, of course, in 2017, RAFTA hauled over 5 million passengers. Of that 5 million, there were several 100,000 trips to support the Grand Avenue Bridge detour, which without RAFTA would have never happened. We would have gone to total gridlock in Glenwood, and we are all pleased the bridge is done and the detour is over with. So what the Destination 2040 plan represents is the results of about 2.5 years of planning and outreach, and let me talk about the main messages here. These Destination 40 improvements are going to reduce congestion. They're going to provide multimodal travel options that work for any lifestyle, again, trying to tap into the active transportation and the transit habits of our communities. Of course, improving and maintaining the trail system while providing more access and connection to trails, getting back to the Rio Grande Trail and what a huge community asset that is. Of course, Destination 2040, when we went out to the elected officials and transit users, everybody wanted to see expanded and improved transit service, and there's a strong push to go to modern, cleaner, quieter buses that are better for the environment, and that specifically is a battery electric bus, which is an important part of this program. So let me talk about our stakeholders. We've got a long list of active stakeholders. I want to point out one that you might all be interested in. We do coordinate with the Mid-Valley Planning Commission. David and I have been to several meetings with the Mid-Valley Planning Commission, and I know that some of their activities are important to you folks here in Basalt. We've been at this since March of 2016. We've gone through 4 stages. The first stage was define the vision, and you can see the list of outreach meetings we accomplished there. The stage 2, which kind of happened August 16 through March of 17, was to determine future needs. That was a ridership model was done, population and employment growth projections were done, and so on. The third stage is analyze options, and that's where we went in and started pulling out projects and looking at the impacts of projects. Again, another robust public outreach session. And now we're into kind of the final stage, which is establish a financial plan. We'll be going to a RAFTA retreat this Thursday, and then towards June and July, the RAFTA board will be talking about adding a ballot initiative question to know the November 18 ballot to produce a property tax revenue stream, and I'll talk a lot about that in a minute here. So the way we've broken our projects down, they're kind of in 3 buckets. The first bucket is improvements for environment, and I'll refer you to the paper we've handed out here. The first sheet is kind of a summary. The green is the improvements for the environment. The blue represents reducing congestion and improving mobility. So you can follow along. I don't have these details, but just let me go through the improvements for the environment. Bus replacement and pedestrian crossings are important. TDM is transportation demand management. That's basically an approach to manage traffic by providing both incentives and disincentives. For example, a disincentive is paid parking, and incentive is increased transit service. So there's a component for that, and of course trails are an important component also. The next bucket we looked at was improvements for reducing congestion and improving mobility, and this is really an important part of the RAFTA plan, and that's to expand the buses, going to the battery electric buses and so on, parking and parking ride improvements, and of course, improving the regional service. Let me go back. Improving the regional service is very important, and I'll talk in more detail about that in a minute. And again, if you want to see the specifics of each project, you can just go and key it to the various colors. So let me keep on moving here because I want to get into discussion. Then, of course, there's improvements for transportation and safety. These are the things, the facilities you need to support RAFTA, the maintenance facilities and so on, housing and offices. Those are all important parts of any sort of expansion for RAFTA. So this is a new graph, or new map. You all are seeing it for the first time. Dan, we want to pass those out. So this is some new messaging. It talks about RAFTA and the various attributes of RAFTA on this side, and when you turn it over, you've got a project map here. And that's what's up on the screen right now. And you can see that projects are dispersed pretty well through the, oops, keep pushing the wrong buttons here. James trained me, but I didn't get it. You can see the Newcastle to Aspen service area is pretty well represented here with a mix of projects. But let me focus in here in the Basalt area first of all. I see C3. C3 is a service increase, weekend BRT with spring and fall. C2 is bus expansion for new services, again improving the headways. C1 is going to a full 30-minute valley service. These are all important service improvements. C7 is improvements to the bus stations. Some of the non-BRT stations need some improvements, some upgraded shelters and things like that. As we get closer to Basalt, I identify C9. C9 is expansion of the Willits BRT park and ride. I also see E2. E2 is expanding the bike share, the WeCycle here in Basalt. Moving through Basalt, I see C17. C17 is microtransit accommodations at BRT stations. That's to allow on-demand ride share like Lyft or Uber to more conveniently access the stations. That may be as simple as re-signing and restriping some of the bus stops, but that's important. This is a 2040 plan, remember, so we've got to think about it in that term. I think I missed C11. C11 was a park and ride expansion in Aspen Junction. Another park and ride that I developed when I was at CDOT that I never would have believed would ever gotten used, and we developed it and opened it up, and it filled up the first day, much like the park and ride at Basalt. That was the first project we built as part of the 4-lane expansion. It was built in 1996, predicted to fill up around 2012. It filled up the day after we opened it in 1996. So Basalt really does a good job of using transit. So here's a map that you guys can spend some time looking at, and I just kind of quickly went through the projects, but this is kind of a new effort to try to get people an understanding of the regional attributes of this. So let me talk about the numbers a little bit here. RAFTA, as a regional transportation authority under state law, is allowed to levy a property tax mill levy from 0 to 5 mills, and that's the revenue stream that the RAFTA board has asked us to look at in detail. We've done an analysis around 3 mil, and we've also done an analysis around 5 mil. And let me just spend a moment and explain how we did it. We basically took 70% of the proceeds from this revenue stream and put them into capital improvements. That would be things like buying new buses, expanding park and rides, fixing bus stops, trail improvements, and so on. And then we assigned 30% to service, which really means expanding the bus schedules, things like that. So when we do the 3 mil analysis, roughly speaking, throughout the RAFTA jurisdiction, that raises about $10.5 million a year. And so if you split it into 70 and 70-30, what you end up with is about 7.35 million annually for capital improvements, and that leaves about 3.15 for service improvements, but our annual needs are more like 3.6, so we end up coming up about $490,000 a year short at 3 mil. At 5 mil, the picture looks dramatically different. The annual revenue stream jumps to $17,500,000. You can see that we've got positive balances for both operations and maintenance, and also for capital. So what this is telling us is 3 mils is probably a little bit low to make this improvement list work. 5 mils is high. We're working on the sweet spot right now in preparation for the rafter retreat on Thursday, and it's probably going to be in the 3 to 4 mil range, but stay tuned on that. This is a 30-year breakdown. This is a 30-year planning process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is fairly complicated, but I want to point out a few things. Under both a 3 mil and a 5 mil scenario, the majority of the revenues for any one given item goes to bus replacement, and that's what RAFT is all about, is keeping the buses running. And you can see that, again, at 3 mils, we still end up short on an operating balance, but at 5 mil, we end up really high. So again, the financial analysis are pointing us to be more in the 3 to 4 mil range, and the board will be giving us some direction on that. There are some other projects. We inaccurately call them below the line, but we did include them there on the last page. They're called potential additional destination 2040 projects. These include circulators for Carbondale, Basalt, and Newcastle. Now, the reason they're called below the line, so to speak, is because the current RAFTA board policy is not to fund circulators. For example, the Aspen and the Glenwood circulators are all being run by RAFTA under contract, so Glenwood and Aspen are paying for that. In doing the outreach, these communities, Carbondale, Basalt, and Newcastle, have all expressed a desire for circulators. So those are below the line because they don't follow the RAFTA policy, but those policies could be subjected to some additional discussion, particularly with a new revenue stream. But I wanted to point that out because I know that a Basalt circulator is something that's been talked about for a long time here. So let me talk a little bit about what these mill levies look like. A residential mill levy obviously is lower. Some of you may be familiar with the Gallagher Amendment. We don't have the time and I don't have the expertise to fully explain it. But what this chart shows, this is actual property value in the vertical axis and the monthly increase to your property tax in the horizontal axis. So if you've got a $500,000 actual property, this is not assessed value, this is actual property value. At 1 mil, you're going to be paying about $3 a month additional. At 3 mil, which is probably a more realistic number based on the analysis to date, you're going to be closer to maybe $9 a month. And at 5 mil, you're going to be right at $15 a month for a $500,000 property. We also ran the analysis on an annual basis. Most of us pay our housing costs monthly, either a mortgage or a rent payment. But again, you can see annually for a $500,000 house or dwelling of some kind, you'd be paying probably about $40 a year. At 3 mil, you'd be paying a little over $100 a year. And at 5 mil, which I think is an unlikely number, I think is probably going to be higher than the financial capacity analysis indicates, be about $175 a year. Let me show you what things look like at commercial. Commercial properties are taxed higher, again, because of the way we calculate property values in Colorado. So I'm going to pick on a $2 million commercial property on a monthly basis, be $48.73 at 1 mil, $145 a month at 3 mil, and $241 and change for a 5 mil. Again, that's a monthly increase. On an annual increase, you can just multiply all those numbers by 12 and give you a feel. These are important to give people a sense. We know that it's a very difficult thing for elected officials to ask for tax increases, but we want to be fully transparent with our process, and there's been a fair amount of interest, although one of the things I've noticed is unless you pull out your property tax bill, a lot of people aren't completely aware of what they're paying and how those things add up, and it's a pretty long list. But just to give you an idea, like in Rifle, for example, the Grand River Hospital District is pulling about a 4.9 mil levy, and I don't have anything locally to compare that to, but that's just kind of one that we found that was close to what RAFTA might be asking for. This is the RAFTA service area. Everything in blue, that includes Snowmass, Aspen, unincorporated Pickens County, of course, Basalt, 4 precincts in Eagle County, 7, 8, 24, and 25. Then we've got Carbondale as a RAFTA member, Glenwood Springs, and then Newcastle. You can see there's a big white space. That's unincorporated Garfield County. They are not members of RAFTA, nor Silt, Rifle, or Parachute. They're not members of RAFTA either. But we wanted to just demonstrate this because, for example, when I talked to some people up in Basalt that lived at the ranch at the Roaring Fork, they've got a RAFTA stop there, but they don't pay any RAFTA sales tax. Not that there's a lot of ways to spend money at the ranch at the Roaring Fork. But this is kind of interesting because all the people in the white shaded area are not going to be voting on the tax. It's only going to be within the blue area, but again, those are the areas within the RAFTA jurisdiction. One other point that we need to make in the interest of full transparency, probably 80 to 85% of the property tax revenues will be collected in the Upper Valley, with the remainder in the Lower Valley, which I'm calling Carbondale, Glenwood Springs, and Newcastle. And again, these are 5 mil numbers, which I think are probably going to end up being high, but wanted to give everybody an idea. There's a lot of questions about, you know, are we in the RAFTA jurisdiction or are we not? The projects I've shown you are all in the RAFTA jurisdiction. We did do a fully integrated plan, and we've got another 20 or 30 projects that take us out into West Garfield County, but those are way below the line, and they're not in the program right now. But since this is a regional effort, I know we've got people commuting out of Rifle and Silt, probably up to Basalt. Glenwood's importing about 60% of their labor. Aspen's importing about 69%, and I heard some conversation among some of your town staff. A lot of your town staff live in my community, Glenwood, and commute up. So this is really a regional problem. The Garfield County Commissioners are interested in providing service out in this area, but it's going to have to be on kind of a pay-as-you-go basis. And Dan, you want to spend just a minute and talk about how you guys handle Garfield County now for their services out there?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us tonight. Garfield County has an intergovernmental agreement with RAFTA and contributes this year $732,000 to help support the Grand Hogback commuter bus service that operates between Rifle and Glenwood Springs. The fully allocated operating cost of that service is a little over $1 million, and fares are generating maybe $175,000 to $200,000 in revenue. Newcastle is a member, and they're generating something over $200,000 in sales tax a year. So that service is largely being covered by a contribution from Garfield County. They also pay 50% of the cost of the Traveler Senior Program for unincorporated Garfield County and the municipalities that are in Garfield County that are not RAFTA members. They have had a meeting recently, 2 actually work sessions last week, one in Parachute that was very well attended and one in Rifle that was less so, to gather input on whether or not people who live out there would like to see more bus service. And the overwhelming feedback that they got from the public was that they really would like to see more bus service, and I think that there's a chance that they'll want to contract with RAFTA to increase the service maybe between Rifle and Parachute as a first step, and then come back and supplement the service between Glenwood Springs and Rifle, which is kind of bare bones right now.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Well, we're getting to the tail end of this. In fact, we're there. One thing we'd like to accomplish today is to get a head nod from this board in terms of what we're going to ask you is whether you think it's a good idea to move ahead with a ballot initiative. That's a complicated enough question to ask at this point. But are there any questions? I just laid about 2.5 years of work on you guys in 20 minutes.
What took you so long?
I know. Well, we started late, Dan, so.
Well, I wanted to thank Councilors Slack and Infante for coming tonight. I know some people are tied up Valley and just usually can't get here for this early kind of work session, so nothing personal, but thank you guys for coming, so I wouldn't have to sit here by myself
Well, Jackie could make this presentation probably.
in my sleep. So ask questions, even if they seem obvious or that you should know, you shouldn't know. I mean, this stuff is heavy, 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 and there's a lot of it. So I would say just come right out, and if you've got a thing in your gut, ask it.
You guys have 5 million rides yearly, you say?
Yes, sir.
Do you know how many unique riders you have?
Do you mean somebody that might be physically challenged, or?
No, like, no, it's fine, like unique, like how, like, there's 5 million rides counted by one person. If I ride the bus every day up and down, that's probably counted as, that'd be counted as over 700 rides a year, correct?
I think
Yes.
that the best way that we could try to answer that question is by talking about some of our polling results. We've had a number of polls every time we've gone to the voters. This last time around, I think the question was asked, do you or somebody in your household use the bus? And we surveyed 300 people by telephone, and about 50% of the respondents throughout the region said yes to that question. We asked the question a little differently, I think, in polls that we did in 2000, 2004, and 2008, and we've seen that number as high as maybe 70% or 74% saying that either they or somebody in their household used the service. And when you think about it, that's a pretty big number, but there are a lot of things that happen in the region, like the X Games, for example, where somebody, that might be the only time they ride the service. The only way you can get there is on bus, or if you're going to go to the fireworks in Aspen, or maybe your car is broken down and you put it in the shop in Glenwood Springs, something along those lines. So people don't use it all the time, but a high percentage of people in the area have ridden it at one time or another for one reason or another.
What about, like, do you have like monthly usership? Is there like ebb and flow? Like in off season, does it dip a little, obviously? Like,
Yes.
do you guys have like more concrete numbers of actual rides? I guess for me, I've been on a lot of buses that it's me, right, going to Aspen. Granted, I'm probably going at different times than someone else. So I know you have to have a bus going up to have a bus coming down.
Right.
So you can't stop that. But I also just wonder about the utilization. Expanding service is great, but at what point are we expanding service to too much? I guess is my question.
That's an excellent question, and I think there's always ways that we can be more efficient. With the implementation of our bus rapid transit system, we got technology that enables us to really monitor ridership by trip. And to answer your question, winter is our peak season. Peak hours are our busiest times. The summer's our second busiest season, and then the spring and the fall are less so. When we go from winter into the spring and the fall, we typically reduce the level of service that we provide. I think if we have excess capacity, it might be in those midday times, especially with the BRT service, where we have 15-minute service during the winter time, during the midday, and during the summer we have half-hour service. Some of that was required initially by the Federal Transit Administration, where we got a $24 million, $25 million grant from them. We had to guarantee that we provide a certain level of service for 3 years. We're past that. It's time for us to kind of analyze it and perhaps tweak it to some extent. Even though the capacity might be more than is needed during the midday time, it does help to contribute to that peak hour capacity to it. The overall convenience of the service makes it more attractive to people that are maybe not going up for full 8 hours or going down for full 8 hours and want to weigh back. So we have to be a little bit skilled in how we make the reductions. And because we are a regional service that's 40 miles long, there's going to be some inherent inefficiencies in the way we provide the service because in the morning, for example, buses may be standing room only. They turn around, they come back, they really don't have too many people on them, but we have to get them back to where they started. So that's one of the things that we just have to deal with, is that we're such a long route that it's tough to make it efficient in both directions all the time.
Hi, Gary.
Hello, sorry I missed that.
Hey, Gary.
Hanging out with the BOCC too long. So, you looking at me for questions?
Yeah, just
Well,
checking.
I mean, so, the question I was gonna have, you guys, have you made the decision on 3 mil or 5 mil yet?
We haven't, we're having a board retreat on Thursday
Thursday.
here at Rocky Mountain Institute. And we're going to ask the board to basically give us their sense of what they're comfortable with if we were going to move forward. In other words, the decision to move forward has not been made. And you know, no decision about a rate of mill levy has been made either. However, it seems like that in that 3% range, maybe between 3 and 4 would be the upper threshold that most of the board members would feel comfortable with. But we have to have kind of a very healthy discussion amongst all of the various members of the rafted board that go all the way out to Newcastle, to Snowmass, Pitkin County, Mid-Valley, to see if everybody's on the same page, and there's enough consensus to continue the process while we continue to evaluate the finances and so forth. And hopefully, if the board wanted to move forward with the mill levy, they would make that decision most likely in the July meeting, when they would adopt a ballot question and refer it to the voters.
And Dan, I'll just ask a question that I've probably asked before, but just for the group, and that is, of the money on the list, okay, what would be the prioritization to make sure that we accommodate growth, if that's what we want to do, and kind of avoid the upgrades, if you will, like the electric buses and anything else that you would say is more, not fluff, but upgrades? How would that roll out? What would that look like?
At the retreat, we're going to be presenting, in essence, about 4 different scenarios, 4 to 5 different scenarios. One being, what would it take just to kind of keep doing what we're doing and not really set ourselves up for growth? What would set us up so that we'd be able to respond to growth, but it might not have some of the projects that communities like yours have said they would like to have on the list. We're also going to present a scenario that says, okay, we're going to really try to be as efficient we can and go beyond efficiency and maybe cut into the muscle of what we do in order to be sustainable long-term without raising taxes. So the board will have an opportunity to look at the bus schedule and say, okay, these trips are not going to happen if we cut the service. And they will also be able to look at 4 or 5 different options that would start at maybe less than 2 mils on up to somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.2 or 4.3 mils. So we have all that available for that discussion, and I think that we're in the 2 mil range, actually 3 mils to have more of the kind of meat and potatoes that we need to be set up for future growth.
And back to kind of what Brian Slack was asking about real ridership. I guess one of the things that I think about is that we make sure we accommodate the tourists, because that's, you know, winter season and everything, but the locals tend to squeal when services cut back in off-season because they still need it. So for me, I hear that every off-season, and so that's one for me that we gotta take care of the visitors, otherwise it would just be a log jam. But taking care of the locals, the ones that are paying for it, is cool too.
Well, that's why the service improvements largely have to do with, for example, currently after 8:15, there is only 1 bus per hour that goes to Glenwood Springs. So if I live in Carbondale, if I live below Elgibel, I don't have many options to get home, so it makes it less likely that I'm gonna use the bus to go to work if I have another option. We also, in the wintertime and the summer, have one BRT bus per hour that goes until about 12:15 from Ruby Park. So what we would like to do, and this is the way it's been since about, I guess, since the dawn of time, is make it so that at least there's half-hour service after 8:15 p.m. on weekdays, on weekends, peak seasons, and the off-seasons for people that live below eligible, because they represent a growing number of people that are starting to use this service. And the lack of frequency really is a disincentive to getting more people to use the service. In Basalt, you may not deal with the levels of congestion that they have in Aspen, although the Mid-Valley area is starting to be kind of busy. And so, you know, we are doing our best to try to make the services attractive and convenient for people as we can, so that more people will use it and it'll take more cars off the road. Because if you looked at our service starting down in Glenwood and looked at the ridership, it's kind of like a river. It, you know, it just grows and grows and grows as we go up valley. But if it's not convenient enough in those down valley areas, then we're not going to capture some of those riders that are currently driving their cars.
And so, one of the big questions, I know I hate bringing it up because it's not something you can answer, but a lot of the growth is happening in Garfield County. And what are the plans to get Garfield County as part of RAFTA? Because there's a funding piece in there that's missing. And I know you need to be careful on how you answer that, but you know, it's a concern for, you know, the jurisdictions that pay into this, you know, and we're trying to get our master plan okay. We're trying to work with Eagle County on their master plan and trying to deal with growth, trying to include RAFTA funding in, you know, trying to deal with transportation-oriented development and all that. So how do we deal with that in Garfield?
Well, RAFTA would be better off financially if Garfield County was a contributing member. They are, as I think I explained before you arrived, they are paying for most of the cost of the I-70 corridor service, but it's bare bones. They're not really contributing to services in the 82 corridor, but then they don't have a lot of stops out there, and they have Ranch Roaring Fork, they have Aspen Glen, they have County Road 154, you know, Spring Valley Campus turnoff. But if they were a contributing member, they would help to, you know, defray debt service on vehicles and facilities and contribute to services, and it would be better for everybody. If they become members, they're going to want something for it more than they're getting now, though, and that's the kind of the balance that we have to walk. They're going to want to see more service in the I-70 corridor, which I think would ultimately benefit everybody. But a lot of their contribution could be kind of targeted for that jurisdiction. And based on some of the travel demand study that we have done, or travel pattern studies that we've done, people that live in Parachute and Rifle, for the most part, the majority of them don't commute up to Aspen. They maybe go as far as Carbondale, because there's a certain tolerance, a certain threshold of how far people will actually drive, unless, you know, you're in the construction business and you've got a pickup truck and you're hauling your tools. You're not going to get on the bus anyway. So I think it would be good to have them as a member, and we're continuing to work on that, but it might not happen for a while until there's a little turnover, you know, there. But we feel good that we've made some inroads in terms of the support that they provide for that I-70 corridor service. And they've made other contributions to the construction of the Rio Grande Trail, to the BRT scoping study that we did. They contributed $200,000 of that. So, you know, we just do the best that we can.
And another thing, Gary, that even the elected officials in Garfield have said before, I don't know if they still feel this way, is that they would be happier to pay a contract service like Snowmass Village does, and like Glenwood and basically Aspen, just pay it fully funded contract service, because they don't really want to be in. So, I mean, they almost are doing that now, and maybe they would up that ante if there was some pressure from their constituents.
I think we may see that with the Grand Avenue Bridge project. As you know, RAFTA and the Elected Officials Transportation Committee contributed a total of about $800,000 to ramp up the services in the I-70 corridor around Glenwood Springs. And the service was free in the I-70 corridor, and it was about every 15 minutes during peak times. And so it was premier service. You know, people got to ride new over-the-road coaches with Wi-Fi and, you know, all the bells and whistles. And we attracted a lot. People never used transit before. And so I think the commissioners have been hearing from some of those people that they would like to be able to use service, but it's got to be more convenient. And so I think in the future we can do that, but with a contract service, the challenge is how do you plan long-term if your contract it's subject to annual renewal and so forth and so on. And one of the reasons that we're, you know, I guess advocating for a dedicated property tax is so that we can plan long-term for our capital replacement and for other infrastructure needs that we have, because many of them were acquired with federal funding initially. And I think the federal funding initially was intended to be seed money to kind of get it going. We got our first big grant here in the region in 1982, and we've still been kind of applying for as many grants as we can get, and we've been successful, but the outlook for federal funding and even state funding is a little bit uncertain going forward. So if we could get a property tax in place, it would make RAFTA a lot stronger financially and in a better position to replace its buses over time.
Susan, did you have something?
Well, just before we wrap up, I know Dan and Ralph really wanted to keep this at a high level, so if we could maybe wrap up with any kind of high level, you know, ballot questions that you want to pass on. I just want to cover two technical things. One is that when we were looking at the project list, we just wanted RAFTA to be aware that we're looking on these kind of highway off BRT improvements, if that could include the bus stop at the over here at the River Park. As you know, we had originally included that in the bond that didn't pass, and you know, Ryan is kind of starting to look at how we're going to fund everything as we move forward. And so if we could kind of look to improvements on drainage and a new bus stop. So if anybody has problems with that, let us know, and because I think we'll be pushing for that. And then the other thing is that when we were at the IMPTR meeting, which is the Intermountain Regional Transportation meeting, which is where they start, your projects kind of have to be on their plans in order to be funded. RAFTA asked us for a list of transit projects by jurisdiction. And of course they asked by May 22nd. So our intent as staff, not to make this a big project, is just to kind of wrap in and use the RAFTA list. But including the RAFTA list, we wanted to include those kind of what had been kind of slang talked as below the line, which would include the bus circulators. Not that there's any funding. I don't think anybody should get excited that there's going to be any funding coming from CDOT, but just in case there's some statewide ballot things coming down the line. So that's our plan. So if you guys have a problem with that, please let us know. So one is just, you know, we're going to include that we'd like to keep on pushing for the bus stop at the River Park, and two, we're going to support using RAFTA's project list as kind of the town of Basalt's project list.
Is there a burning question? Because we need to cut loose so we have get back here by 6. But go ahead.
Sure. Haven't talked about finance at all. I think you guys are doing a great job. I'm fully supportive of mass transit, and the expansion plan makes a lot of sense from a number of regards, except I don't understand all of the financing. It looks like you guys are looking for around $350 million, of which it looks like you've covered around 225 from what I gather is the mill levy, the 3 or the 5. And so I guess the question is, where's the remaining balance going to come from if you're about 100 million short? And then just observations, I think you will experience pushback on the mill levy. There is certainly in my conversations a little bit of mill fatigue, and we consistently seek to further increase the burden on taxpayers rather than looking to other market mechanisms. You talked a little bit about them at the outset, using incentives and disincentives, so I'd kind of be interested in what your expectations are for fare increases or for any other kinds of remedies that would be associated with pricing. Because in my own experience, just being a business owner here, owning a property, having residential property, the hit to me will be about $2,000 between those two sources of wealth. And that's significant, frankly. And so I will certainly resist as a business owner what is already a fairly stiff burden in the form of the sales tax that we have to collect, which raises a whole series of other questions. We charge 0.8 mils for the Basalt sales tax, and I kind of wonder why Aspen's only at 0.4 if they've got the bulk of the ridership. And so what I fear is that expanding the RAF to service will in fact be a disincentive to business when it should actually be a source of benefit for business.
Even though the public needs to hear all these answers, we don't have time right now, but we could at least get these answers for you and us at dinner if you can stay for some food. Because we need to depart like right now, so we can have 10 minutes to eat before we open the regular meeting.
Or if you guys want to respond in writing, whatever's easiest for you.
Yeah, I think if we could
Because
get some bullet points to those questions, we'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, could you put the questions in writing just so that they,
Why don't we download them and do a
Okay.
transcript?
okay.
Because it basically comes down to finances. What's your source of funds, what's your use of funds, what's the capital cost? There's no discussion, and again, we're coming to this relatively new, but again, without understanding what the overall budget is, 345 million on top of something might be unreasonable, or it might be very reasonable. I don't know, it's impossible to
Okay,
tell.
we are going to go on break right now for a few
Well,
minutes.
thank you for your time.
And
Thank you,
Bill
guys.
is going to
Great
get you some
presentation.
questions. right? Thanks.
Somebody's gonna download them and get them to you.
Great questions.
RAFTA's Destination 2040 plan, and there's going to be a retreat regarding that issue on Thursday, like all day, so there'll be more to report after that. So we're going to call this meeting to order at 6:03 and ask Pam Schilling if she will do a roll call, please.
Nobody caught that. Gary Tenenbaum.
Here?
Bernie Gro, oh God, I haven't changed my list. Katie Schwer. Here. Autumn Schendler.
Here.
Jennifer Riffle.
Present.
Bill Infante.
Here?
Ryan Slack.
Here.
Jackie Whitson.
Yep.
Did everybody?
How's everyone?
That's everyone.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, I don't have my little cheat sheet, and I can't remember our videographer's name, but we want to thank Grassroots. They always do our meetings for us. We broadcast live, and you can also catch these meetings that are recorded. And what is her name?
The other thing I
What-
wanted
what's
to.
her- Katie.
Katie
Thank you.
Katie Finnegan, I'm sorry, I had that printed out somewhere. I must have dropped
I
it
know
somewhere.
I've actually introduced you before, because I loved your Irish name.
And I also wanted to mention for the record that we did swear Ryan Slack on Monday a week ago, at 11 a.m. with witnesses, so.
So he's on. He's on.
Yeah, he's officially
He's
on board.
officially on. Also, there is a mayor's coffee every Wednesday following the Tuesday of our meetings. It's at Starbucks at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I always love it if department heads or Brian, our town manager, can come. That way everybody's kind of visible and available for citizen questions. Let's see. The only other thing I want to ask is that there's new people here and old people too, and we just would like to ask that everybody ask for the floor before you speak. That's easy. That's just a hand raise. And
You call me old.
so, Jen, you're my favorite Basalt is an inclusive
I would love to.
Basalt reader.
And Bill and Ryan, take note, because this honor will be passed to you as well.
Fantastic.
Basalt is an inclusive, sustainable mountain community that boasts both historic charm and progressive vision. It is an engaging place to live, work, and play while offering an abundance of creative, professional, educational, and recreational outlets.
Great, thank you so much. So, our first item is the consent agenda, and it just looks like the minutes, special event permit, and a continuation of an item. Does anybody have any questions or want to pull any of those items off, or is there a motion? Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question about the continuation of the town sustainable building regulations. We've been continuing that. It's been on here for a couple meetings, and I'd like a progress report.
Susan, can you do that?
Sure. We've been really making good progress, and we actually re-advertised it, because we have been continuing it, so, and we didn't want the, advertisement to become too stale, but, we really, our building official has had some surgery and has been out, and we're kind of going through kind of the, changes and making sure that we're internally consistent and all that kind of stuff. So we're hoping that in the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to have it. And the other thing is Amanda Poindexter was gonna be out of town for this meeting, so we didn't try to make the final push. And I think the most important thing is we really wanna make sure that the building official is really comfortable with everything that's happening.
Great, thank you so much for the update. And I recognize that this council has approved so many buildings that I have walked into his office, and he has a tremendous workload, so.
Yes,
I-
and that's,
I
thank
have
you
to-
for acknowledging that,
I
because that's
acknowledge.
another issue that we've got a lot going on right now.
Yeah, and,
For asking.
yeah, and on that note, when people say, we haven't done anything, we've approved a lot of buildings.
Is there a motion on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. So the next item is call to the public. We limit our public comment to 3 minutes per person. We would love to have somebody kick this off with something positive to say about Basalt. Robin? Could you come up to the mic?
I love Basalt,
Everything is fantastic here. Yes.
Thank you, Robin.
You're welcome.
I paid her
I like the
before we came in. Are there any other public comments for items that are not on our agenda, not on our agenda? Yes, Tony?
I'm going to wait till James puts the slideshow up. I'd like to welcome Ryan and Bill, and I'm going to jump right into it because last time I said goodbye to the old members and hello to the new members, and I used up half of my 3 minutes. So I don't want to do that tonight.
We're doing it again.
I'm so sorry. Okay, so here we go. So what I want to talk about, and it's not as complicated as RAFTA, but it has to do with the Basalt Municipal Pool and what a great pool it is. And the last meeting that I was here, a lot has happened since then, so I've deleted a couple slides. But I'm going to go through the slides really quickly. So we have the Basalt Municipal Pool, and it's a great pool, and here's why. It has small town character with an Olympic-sized pool, and I did a handout with everyone, and Ryan, you were not here last week, but I'll make sure I brought a handout for you. And these are all the great amenities for the pool, but I'm going to keep moving. So there's one thing that's missing at the Basalt Pool. 99% of all pools have a hot tub, otherwise known as a warm water pool. And one of my goals is to get into the Basalt Pool area. A small hot tub is called an endless pool, which is so much more than a hot tub. One of my goals is, after taking a look at the revenues and expenses that the town of Basalt Swimming Pool brought in the summer, the pool brings in swimming pool revenues in green $83 per day. That is the equivalent of 8 kids at $10 a day, or 16 kids at $5 a day, and we have 1,500 kids within the school district. So in my opinion, and I am a swimming professional, that we are underserving the Basalt community. So I thought, okay, what can we do to increase the usage at the pool? And, whoops, go back. There's a new standard, 2018 National Industry Standards. It's called Smarter Programming. Pools are actually turning a profit now, a return on investment. And what they're doing is they're replacing the old model of daily fees in the tax base with more programming. And how can we do that? Well, as I said, Basalt's the only pool that doesn't have a small warm water pool. This here is an endless hot tub. It's prefab. It can be here in 6 weeks. It's not millions and millions of dollars. It's actually under $50,000 for this pool. And basically, are we ready to take the plunge? And I'd like to thank Susan Phelps very much, because I brought this idea forward to the Post, but we had to wait until Pan and Fork kind of got figured out before we could move on this. At the last Post meeting, it was agreed that they're going to have some public open houses over at Albany Park, and I'm hoping we can include the pool area so that people can come and see what improvements are being proposed. And I don't think at this time that Susan has set a date yet, so we're anxiously awaiting for the date so we can get out there and invite the whole community to come to your wonderful pool. And it is the best pool in this whole area. You probably have more square footage than even the Aspen Recreation Center, because you have a 6-lane Olympic-sized pool with a separate diving well, an attached one, an attached toddler area, and then a fenced-in kiddie pool. Yes.
Perfect.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
That's a first.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
That's great.
Oh, goodness. My dog is in the first picture. Okay.
Any other public comments, items not on the agenda? Okay, Mayor and council reports and comments? Okay. I don't have one either. Not even a sports report? Anybody got a sports report? Okay. All right, manager's report. We've got Ryan Mahoney right here with us.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, thank you. In your packet, you had a memo that the Finance Director, Judy Tippett, put together. As a reminder, Judy's last day was today, so she's not present to answer more in-depth budget questions, but I thought I'd just do a quick little review of what we got. And so this was a 2017 financial summary. We are in the throes of doing our annual audit right now, and so that's a much more comprehensive document, and our auditor I'm going to have him come and present that to you all. So it's, you can ask all of the questions, and he'd have, quite a bit of background on where we ended up for last year. But just briefly, the revenues that were budgeted came in at 80% or so of budgeted, and expenditures were at 70% of budgeted. So the actual revenues that we received in the general fund were about 9.3 million, and expenditures were at about 9.6 million. So the general fund ended about $233,000 below expected, and there were some costs last year that were unanticipated, which account for some of those revenues being below. And essentially what that did for us was just not allow us to backfill our reserve as much as we had wanted. Moving forward into the 2018 budget, we do anticipate that those reserves will come back up to the 33%, in being consistent with our policy 103. A couple other quick items to note. We do have 2 existing lines of credit. One is for the underpass, and we owe about $2 million on that line of credit. We're set to pay $650,000 out of post for the next 3 years, and that'll be paid off. Total cost for that was $7.2 million, with the town of Basalt's overall contribution being just shy of 3. So we had other partners that joined us on that, which was great, but it paid for more than half of it. The second line of credit we have is on our affordable housing. We owe about $2 million on that as well. We currently have 18 units, soon to be 19, with a new 3-bedroom from Willits that will be coming our way soon. Rent revenues are the main source for paying off that debt. We take in about $250,000 a year in rent revenues and have approximately $100,000 in expenses per year, and so we take that delta and pay off the debt. Sales tax for last year was up. It was about 6.21%. I believe we budgeted 4%, using just estimating what we thought would come in, so that was favorable. And quickly on our bond funds, we have certified 5.8 mils for bonds, and of those, 2 of them will pay off in 2021, and the other will pay off in 2023. So the use of those funds, one of which was for approximately 3 million, and then 1.88 million. Those 2 were used for the Pan and Fork, and then the first tax exempt was used for the Levinson parcel. And so we'll be coming into paying those off in the next few years. Last year, the water fund actually came in with revenues a little higher than anticipated because of some water taps that came in that weren't anticipated. And so we were actually able to add to the fund balance by about $6,000, which for last year worked well. If you recall, we did raise water rates to be able to keep up with anticipated expenses. And just as a reminder, with regard to the water fund, that is an enterprise fund, so it's wholly supported by user fees, and no taxes are supplementing those expenditures for that. So with that, if there's any general questions, I can certainly try to answer them. And like I said, there will be a much more in-depth look at 2017 revenues and expenses.
I have one quick question. The second to the last sentence in the document, I did not understand. what that-
Conservation Trust Fund one, or?
The second to the last
Second.
sentence in the whole document.
Policy 103.
Oh, the policy.
2018 unrestricted revenues.
So.
Can you just read that?
Sure, so we have policy 103 that requires us to have a reserve, and essentially that reserve is as follows. So the general fund reserves shall be budgeted at 33% of the budgeted unrestricted general fund revenues.
This next sentence is the one that is.
Oh, the last?
There's a little typo in there.
It's
Oh, is
just,
there?
I just don't understand it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
18.
Unrestricted revenues were budgeted at 7.5 million, 33% or 2.5 million. Yes, there's,
What does that mean?
so basically 33% that would be that 2.5 million. That's what should be in reserves. Yeah,
Got
so
it.
you're right. I'm sorry. There's a word missing there clearly.
I just thought, well, maybe it was a multiple choice question.
Yeah.
Something like that. Okay, anybody have any questions from, yes, Bill?
Just a couple questions, Ryan, about kind of budget mechanics. Because I, like many people, was listening to public radio this morning, and I was kind of interested when the reporter commented on the amount that was paid last year to settle a lawsuit. And we talked about the amount of capital deficit being approximately 200,000, but it looks like we're 300,000 short in the reserves. So we'd just kind of like to explore that a little bit. And then also, I guess there are several questions about the revolving funds and then the bond funds. If one of the revolvers is used for the purchase of affordable housing, the question then ultimately resides with the taxpayer. Is what is the taxpayer getting for the $2 million that we're borrowing on a revolving basis for affordable housing, and how is that allocated in according to which formulas?
Counselor, can we stop you a second? Can we let him answer one at a time? Because like the raft of barrage of questions.
Oh, I didn't necessarily expect that they would all be
Oh,
answered
okay, I
tonight.
thought you wanted him to answer regarding
No,
this
this is more
document.
kind of
Oh,
a-
okay, just later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because otherwise, I suspect they could be longer. And then I guess the other question related to the bond funds, the two series of the bonds, the 3,060,000 and the 1,888,000, combines to a little bit less than 5 million, that, as I understand, was invested in the Pan and Fort property. So just understanding the dimensions of that investment, what exactly the taxpayers bought and what it provides for kind of in the future.
You're gonna go to school on that one. There's a lot to.
I bet.
Or to the woodshed or something.
So,
Sure. Do you want me to try to answer
No.
some of those?
right,
Not now.
There's, I mean, as far as improvements go, with regard to the bond funds, essentially that, went toward improving that piece of property, getting it out of the floodplain, doing river bank improvements that were associated with the river master plan, and, essentially readying it for development. And so that was, and plus the purchase of the property that the town now owns, which was, I guess 2.5 acres or so of riverfront property. And so that's what would be attributed to those expenses. With regard to your affordable housing question, I think the idea was initially with regard to having some affordable housing that the town would have available units to be able to recruit and retain employees for the long term. We did acquire more than was initially anticipated through a series of transactions. For example, our old Snowmass property was acquired with a trade when we did the RMI construction, and then the BC building at Gold Rivers Court, just here across the way, was acquired when a number of the owners in that area came and basically couldn't sell it on the open market because of some of the deed restrictions on it. So the question of what's the right amount of units to own, I think that's certainly a question for this council to explore. But I will say that there's a number of town employees, including myself, living in our units, but then also other employees, government employees, and the like that are within the county and the area. So
I like that, and the like.
Right.
People. One thing I would suggest, I think we have all had these same questions and still do have some of the questions, especially on affordable housing. But I think we're going to take that on by the horns very soon. But I would
Okay.
also suggest if you need to dig a little deeper in that interim because you
Okay.
kind of just got here, I would suggest sitting down with Ryan and
Okay.
going through kind of this historical stuff, and then when we come around to the budget and our future
Right.
planning, then, you know, you kind of have some of those
Okay.
questions answered.
And I guess whether that happens in a work session or somewhere else, but it's basically the public policy question about the proper role and function of government, whether we should be speculating on real estate and whether we should be functioning as a property manager and operator or not. And so that's a very, very different policy question, not to speak of the financial question.
We should definitely talk about that. I think that when you govern in the resorts, if you aren't a property manager, you don't have any employees.
I know, that's why
Right.
we shouldn't be.
No.
And it's not the intention.
I know, that's precisely my point.
But just to bring you up to speed a little bit, this is very much on council's radar, and the conversation came up in the last year of maybe we shouldn't manage this at all or own it. So
Right.
that's something we do need to deal with.
When I guess it's important because it is actually coming up later on tonight.
I was about to say,
It
tonight
is.
we're having a
That-
big
that's why I'm
conversation
raising
on
it.
some of this stuff.
And that's one of my questions that I'll ask then.
Okay,
And it's a pain in the butt to own and operate housing.
I would think so.
Okay.
I have one very, please elucidate me, I do not recall where Levinson parcel is.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's like where the Old Pond Park is, and so RMI is located on that, as well as the new River Center.
Okay, and was the library ever it was, the Levinson parcel was somehow connected to the library?
That's correct.
Okay.
You know, we got bond funds, the language in the bond said that we could buy property and sell it and use the funds to help implement the goals of the bond. So we bought the Levinson property, we bought the library, sold the entire Midland Park and the library, and then sold part of it to the library. So there was a number of transactions. I think the Confluence parcel over here might have been included in that also.
Okay, are those all considered Levinson parcel or only the RMI?
Well, it's the biggest piece it kind of started with that transaction, and that's why it just kind of commonly gets referred to as kind of the Levinson bond, I think, just for
Okay.
practical things. That was kind of the biggest purchase.
But when we refer to the Levinson parcel, it is specifically the parcel
When
over
we
at the
specifically talk
Pond
about the
Park.
Levinson parcel, it is part of the Old Pond Park.
Yep.
And the other
Thank you.
part came from CDOT, so you don't even want to go into the weeds on all that, but.
Anybody else regarding this manager report?
I greatly appreciate the memo. We didn't have this the last 2 years, and I'd like to see this practice continue into the future. And definitely, it's very helpful and imperative.
Did you have anything else, Ryan?
I have one more thing, is that tomorrow morning I'm going to be participating with volunteering over here on the corner for Bike to Work. So I might miss you in the morning for coffee. So I'm going to sign up little kids so they don't get lost on their way to school.
Maybe we should all be there.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks.
Ryan.
Yeah.
Okay, our next item is a couple of 2 or 3 minute informal presentations, which we're looking forward to. And the first one is Mauricio Sosa, Peace Garden Funds, and it looks like you have an assistant, and you just need to come up so you're on the mic. And I know you're soft-spoken, so. Just 2, 3 minutes.
Is this good?
How are you, Mauricio?
Good, how are you?
Good.
So, I actually started on a project my freshman year, and that was 4 years ago. And the inspiration behind the Peace Garden actually started very early on in my schooling career. As a victim of bullying, I always wanted a place where I could be alone or go outside and reflect my thoughts, or just get away from school and get away from certain people. So when I got into high school, I actually wrote my first grant or scholarships, and that was through the 5 Point Film Festival Dream Project. And so that's why I called the Peace Garden my dream project, as you'll see later on. So the garden itself actually is adjacent to the Basalt High School library. And it used to be just a plot of land, just grass. And it was a plot of grass that wouldn't drain the water properly, so it would just be kind of like a swamp in some areas. So my freshman year, I started raising funds. By the spring of my sophomore year, I initially raised the $44,000 for the infrastructure of the Peace Garden, and that included leveling out the land, installing drought-tolerant plants, river rock, pea gravel, benches, picnic tables, and if you go to the next slide, that's actually the design. And thanks to Twisted Tree from Basalt, we actually got to finish the physical aspect of the project spring of 2016. I worked on fundraising for a year after that to complete the initial funding that we needed of $44,000, and that took over a year. So by the spring of 2017, we were actually done with the garden, and that's how it looks for now. So now, coming into my senior year, I'm working on my capstone, and that's the maintenance and sustainability plan of the Peace Garden. And with that, I'm working alongside Robin Waters as my community expert. And our goal is not only to make the garden as sustainable and with little maintenance for it to survive and for it to continue to serve its purpose for many generations to come. And as well as making the garden more appealing. And so our goal by the time I graduate this June is to get shade structures out there, lighting, add more flowers, and just making it more appealing for students. As well as we kind of want to spread the message of the Peace Garden and what it stands for throughout the nation and throughout the state of Colorado. So we're working with several different businesses to help us reach outward, and then we're also making a video talking about the story behind the Peace Garden and kind of just spreading the word, and we plan on posting that all across our social medias and trying to spread the word nationwide. And then as well as releasing a informational pamphlet that has sample grants, a budget, and then just the story behind the garden, and then kind of spreading that around the nation as well. So my dream, well, you can keep going. So what's next? This spring we have raised about $20,000 of our $28,000 goal for phase 2. And that includes having lighting, shade structures, more flowers, upgrade the weed guard, and create a signage and thanking all the donors that have supported the project, and as well as creating the long-term sustainability plan. So we need approximately 8,000 more to complete phase 2 and 3. And so ways that you can keep up with the project is to follow our Facebook page. We recently started a Facebook page for the Peace Garden that keeps funders and people that are interested in the program. And we've gotten likes from all over the country, California, Washington, D.C., Florida, and a few other states. And just keeping them track on our journey, and then as well as just keeping them updated with when the lighting goes in, when there's students, activities out there, as well as when just people in the community are helping to maintain the garden. And then as well as we actually launched a GoFundMe campaign recently, so if anyone wants to donate, it'd be very appreciated and help me complete my garden by the time I graduate. Next one, so these are actually the funders for phase 1, and as you can see, there are over 50, there's a lot, let's just say there's a lot of people. And what I learned through this process is that the project took a village to create this project. We got help from several businesses, several individuals, many businesses, as well as in-kind. And you can see our organization donors, our in-kind donors, our individual donors. And then we're actually getting into, if you go to the next slide, funders for phase 2. And this is the beginning of the help that we've received. And as you can see, the town of Basalt, Pickens County, Eagle County have all helped out, and without you guys, we couldn't have completed this project, at least phase 2. And then as well as you can see individual donors and in-kind donors that have helped so far. If you go to the next slide. So what I've learned throughout this process, this project has actually taught me many things. Coming into high school, I was a very shy, timid person. I could never stand up here and give a presentation. And it's kind of interesting to see not only that I've grown as an individual, but it has actually taught me many skills that I will use as my intended future career, which is as an entrepreneur or anything in the business world. So this project has taught me budget management, writing grants and proposals, and as well as my time management, keeping up with school, and then as well as with the project and meeting our deadlines for grants and just different presentations and whatever came throughout the way. And then as well as prioritizing what needed to be done and kind of setting what's important and then working from there on, and then as well as teamwork. And if you go to the next slide. So I guess I'm done, and I just want to give a big thank you to the town of Basalt, Eagle County, because we have commissioners here, Picken County, and as well as Scott for writing an amazing article that came out on Monday. And then, so if you guys all want to join us on June 1st for our ribbon cutting at 4 p.m. and we'll see.
That would be great.
Jackie
Well,
will
if-
be
I
cutting
will
the
definitely
ribbon.
be there, but I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to say, I worked with Mauricio maybe a year ago, 6 months ago, and I just have to tell you that your speaking skills are fabulous.
Thank
You
you.
were so shy when I first heard you speak, even with a microphone. So it's all working. You're making your life happen.
Thank
It's
you.
awesome. And I wanted to also acknowledge Eagle County Commissioner Kathy Chandler Henry, because I know she is part of the support group here, and thank you for coming in, and we'll look
Kathy
for your
raised-
GoFundMe, and we'll be there on June 1st and all that. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great
you.
work, great
Great
work.
work.
Wow, that's going to be a hard one to follow, right, Christy?
Motion to adjourn.
So our next presentation is Christy Henderson with the Aspen Hope Center. May Mental Health Month.
Yes. My name's Christy, and I just wanted to share with you what we have going on, an update. And I realized I only know Jackie and Pam. I don't know anybody else, and I've lived in Basalt 18 years. It's kind of crazy. And I work at Heather's, too. So first, I just want to tell you about myself. I've been in the Valley since 1999. Worked in real estate as an assistant. And I was very composed, masked my depression, masked all my issues because of pride and embarrassment. And I had a complete breakdown. And someone called the Hope Center for me 6 years ago, actually in June. Changed my life forever in an amazing way, in that I now appreciate what life is about. Wellness, helping each other, and really living your life for what you want to do and not being afraid for what others think of you. So my role is just to outreach and bring awareness. And I say often, everyone supports mental health, but no one likes to talk about it. So I've done some events, and Jackie was there at one of them, Pause for Hope, for example, around Christmas time, or holidays. Photos with your dog and Santa. People come to that and just have people know about us. But May is Mental Health Month. So it's very important to me, and I really truly believe by sharing my story and getting people more willing to talk about their stories as well, we're all very similar. We all have bad days. It's okay to talk about it. We are a crisis center, but we're trying to bring more awareness to everyone that you don't have to be in a major crisis. And I think a lot of people don't call, and I've seen this when people call and ask me about what we do or concerned about people. It's not about a crisis. Everybody's crisis is important, no matter how big or small. I need some water. But with that said, I just want to give you a quick update of new things we have going on, and such as before the month, we have new outreach awareness. So we've worked with the Basalt Library. So every second Monday of the month, we will have a speaker at the library, 5:30, and then someone share their story. So it's a informational yet a personal story. And it'll switch from wellness to health to seasonal depression. It's all sorts of things. People really like wellness around here, so I'm kind of trying to start with that to get a good turnout. And I'm trying to get all these fancy different taglines without mental health in it. But mental health is vital to all of us, whether you have an illness or not. So we have new awareness classes, outreach, support groups, and I'm starting Help Connections after the speaking at the Basalt Library, because I didn't want the word support or group in there, because there's so many in the Valley. And so this Hope Connections is people who need help and people are looking for support. And then also I'm going to do another one, Give and Get Hope, for people that suffer from an illness and just want to get together with others and go for hikes and just really have fun, but also know you can cry or do whatever, that people are here. So what I wanted to announce, though, is we have added a 4th school-based mental health clinician in Basalt this spring, and our core team of clinicians and administration staff continues to flourish. And additionally, we are working, I'm sure as this lady knows, with Eagle County to open up a Hope Center in Eagle River Valley. In 3 years, the Hope Center has been asked to duplicate its model in 4 other rural communities. Eagle County will be now our first endeavor. We are set to launch later this summer and look forward to bringing Love to Crisis work further. And one thing too, just to let you know, we're the only freestanding crisis center in Colorado. There's only 3 in the US. And one of our taglines is "We can talk. One conversation can save a life." And I feel I am living proof of that. And the concept of the Hope Center really helps people. It's not like a psych ward where you get thrown in and meds. That's my attitude on it. They do help, but my point is, the tagline, it's as simple as "We can talk. You are not alone. Everyone struggles. You matter." And that's what I want to share with people. So I had known about May Mental Health Month before. NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Health, has walks and whatnot, but I decided I wanted to do a bunch of things. So as you know, Tyler, I think, spoke a couple weeks about the Color Run, and that benefits us. So that's the kickoff. And then I have 3 different speakers. Mason, who's a county public health specialist, will do a brief suicide awareness. And then Summer Moore, who had done our exhibit at the gallery, she was featured at 5 Point, had a film about mental health and her healing process, will speak next Tuesday. Next Thursday, we have Dr. Davies. He was a psychiatrist when I went to the Hope Center 6 years ago. I haven't seen him since, and all I remember, because I was in such a bad state, is he had great socks. So I'm excited to see him. And that's going to be talking about stop hating ourselves, battling internalized homophobia and transphobia. And then to end the month, May 31st, Martin Oswald, who I've known for years. I had no idea he was a nutritionian, but he owns Pyramid Bistro. Nutrient-dense superfoods, health benefits, cooking techniques. And then end that evening at the Temporary, 6 local comedians. Laughter is the best medicine, which it really is. So with that, it's just any awareness, any people you can pass this on to. I've been madly going through different city council or anywhere throughout the valley getting emails just to get more awareness out. And I think any little thing, mentioning the Hope Center, mentioning what we're doing, it will get more people to come forward. And, as we all know, I'm sure everyone knows someone who's experienced loss, suicide, and it doesn't need to be that tough. I suffered for over 10 years, and I want no one to go through what I've been through. So, thank you for your time. Hope to meet all of you now that I'm finished.
Thank you, Chrissy.
Thank you. And I'm going to hand out my cards. Jackie doesn't need one, or Pam. I have 8 other ones.
Is your schedule of all these things you just mentioned, is it on the Hope?
Yes, it's on the website, and I'm going to be posting it all over different places tomorrow, the chamber. Just if you have any ideas or anything for me, or I've worked in real estate 18 years, so my world as an assistant was very special, and now I'm learning all about all different things, awareness, and city council and town council.
Thanks, Christy. Nice
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, our next item, do I have this item? Yeah, street improvements discussion and resolution 9, why don't I have those?
Item 7A.
Oh, I've got it,
Yeah.
I've got it, yeah.
So Madam Mayor, if I may, I'll
Yeah, go ahead.
kick it off. And we have, I brought reinforcements this evening.
I see that.
And so just in case there are questions, specifics, so I'll let these guys quickly introduce themselves.
Chris Lyon with SGM Consulting Town Engineer.
Matt Wagner, Public Works.
I'm at,
Boyd Beerbaum, Public Works.
yes.
So, I'll kick off the discussion. Ultimately, this evening, we're looking for an approval to the resolution that, that would allow us to enter into contract for road maintenance for the summer. We're doing a little bit of a different approach this summer. Matt has, in years past, chased down and procured the different disciplines for doing road maintenance, whether that be the crack sealing person, the road striping person, or the paving person. And so this year we wanted to gain some efficiency both with regard to time and then hopefully with management and oversight. And so we put it all under one contract. So as you can see from the contract, there are quite a number of road improvements and some significant road improvements. And, you know, in addition to some of the general maintenance stuff, two significant pieces of new paving that would occur are Two Rivers Road, basically from where the construction will end more or less all the way to Highway 82. That's a mill and overlay. As well as down in Willits on East Valley Road, both where the traffic calming is, but then also over near the city market. And so these are all high priorities just based on the conditions of the road. And so it's in a situation where if you let the deterioration go on too long, you're looking at a total rebuild. And so we've prioritized these and think that we're in good shape to get those completed. Gary and I were talking before the meeting about the importance of timing on construction projects. And as you know, the East Valley Road traffic calming project, which we approved at the last meeting, that's going to kick off in the approximate July timeframe. Most of this road maintenance is going to be completed in a very tight timeframe, about a month, 5 weeks, and should be finished by the time we kick that off. So we're trying to get the timing all aligned so that we limit disruption. The whole reason that I'm talking to you tonight really is on a budgetary question. You know, you had all asked, typically, you know, we look at, you know, the bottom line, making sure we're spending within our budget. And this is sort of getting a little more granular and looking at the line items. But ultimately, we would be looking to spend under our budget for this year, leaving about $40,000 remaining. But looking at taking what was two big line items. One was about $300,000 for the roundabout in Willits, which was going to be put in concrete. And then the other $350,000 or so, and I actually included that budget page, so I have it right here. $363,000 was going to be for the road maintenance. So after we started investigating a little more closely the roundabout, which was going to be put in concrete, and had an investigation with the original engineer on that, as well as Chris from SGM, that roadway was built very, it's got a lot of good road base in there and is very sturdy construction. What we think is happening with the pushing of the asphalt is probably a function not only of the heavy truck traffic that's gone through there with construction and delivery, but then probably also the oil mixture that was used originally when it laid down. And so we want to go ahead and do a mill and overlay on that roundabout. And we think that we'll get another 5 to 7 years out of that driving surface. And so there wasn't a pressing need to go to that more permanent solution and more expensive of concrete. So what you have before here, you tonight is the resolution to approve the contract. Basically, we would be sort of intermingling those two line items that you see in that budget page. One was the pavement repair and maintenance, and the other was concrete maintenance, but still staying within budget. So with that, I'm happy to answer some questions, and then Chris does have a recommendation that he put together for the contract.
Okay. Do you have questions so far? Also, it's not a public hearing, but it's a big expenditure, and I noticed that it says right here that there's mention of public comment. So I'm going to say we'll take public comment right now regarding this, this project, just in case. Okay, no public comment. All right, so us. Questions for Ryan, or should we go to the?
I think Bill's got it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, budget
That's-
numbers
no,
again.
No.
Congratulations bringing it in under budget. That's always really, really nice. I was just a little bit, I'm trying to frame what we received in the packets with what we heard last week. Last week, I thought I had understood that East Valley River or traffic calming alone was going to be about $600,000. And the way this breaks down, it looks like East Valley Road efforts are going to be rough and tumble about 110, and the balance is broader stuff. Is that accurate?
So the East Valley Road that we approved last week was for the contract to do the traffic calming piece.
So
Okay.
that's not related
And so
to
that's
this.
not related to this. Well, that's a misstatement. It is in part, because that just included all of the chicane work and some of the, the concrete flat work and repair that we were going to do. What it didn't include was the mill and overlay of the actual road section. And so we have to accommodate that as part of the our maintenance budget. And so if you recall from last week, it was approximately $400 plus thousand dollars, $200,000 of which is going to be reimbursed to us from the Willits town center improvements that we just finished through that negotiation. The East Valley Road, the other East Valley Road mill and overlay is over by the grocery store. So there's two different improvements altogether on that roadway.
Got it. So you guys, or the proposal that's before us tonight is for a contract to deal with all of this other road work, not to include East Valley that we discussed last week.
Correct. That's already, that contract is signed. It's a different contractor
Okay.
altogether, yeah.
But it does mean that the total tab then for East Valley is whatever we discussed last week plus about 125 this week.
Yes, that's correct, yes. And so the pot of money from last week came from restricted funds.
Yeah, I was gonna say
And then
prior
this
year.
one, this is general fund money for general maintenance on our roads.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Chris, did you have a presentation or a discussion?
It'll be short. We put together a bid package that included there's 56 projects in here. And this is, for the money you're spending, you're getting a lot of work done. It's touching almost every street in town. We followed the solids procurement policy and bid it per that for 2 weeks. We had 4 contractors come to the pre-bid and 4 contractors submit bids. The low contractor's Grand River Construction. They've been from Glenwood for 30 years or something. Done work all over the community. All their subcontractors are good. We interviewed them and asked them how they would do it, go through their schedule, everything else, and we believe they're the lowest qualified bidder. So we recommend you hire Grand River Construction.
Somehow I heard this before somewhere, probably from Ryan, but questions from these gentlemen? Anybody? Or further discussion, or a
Mayor, I
motion?
move that town council adopt resolution number 9, series of 2018.
Second.
Let's see, tie goes to the runner. Okay, Katie is the second, I guess. She has the candy, so she gets the second. Further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're good. We're good.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Matt
It
and
sounds
Lloyd,
like you
for
have done
managing
some
this.
seriously tight work on
Some work
this.
done, yeah, it's gonna be good.
A lot of bang for the buck. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, we have a new red item in here, appointment of mayor pro tem. And I know that we have been having Gary as our mayor pro tem for a while, and he's been great, so I don't know if, yes, ma'am.
I feel that in your absence, Gary has done an exceptional job as our mayor pro tem, and I would like to nominate him to continue in that role.
I think this calls for a second.
Second.
This is by acclamation, I would say. Okay, there was a second. Are there any other nominations on the floor? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Do I vote for myself?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Or you could vote against yourself.
I guess I could vote against myself.
Get real
I'm
interesting.
happy to do it because Jackie she does not miss many meetings, so you're not going to miss any next year, so it's
I'm going to miss one actually next meeting, so we almost forgot to do
Great,
this.
You're in the hot seat.
Thanks.
Exactly. Thank you,
Thank you,
Gary,
Gary.
for doing this.
Congratulations, Gary.
Congratulations, Gary.
Yay, with the crown.
It means you don't have to be on another committee.
No?
Well,
Because you
no,
did this,
because
right.
you did this,
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, our next item is public hearing and second reading of Ordinance 8, an ordinance of the town granting special review approval for the development of an ADU on a parcel located at 105 West Sopris. The Reese application, Sarah.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, I'm Sarah Nadolny with the town's planning department, and sitting here at the table is the applicant's representative, Harry Teague, who's also
The Honorable Harry Teague, you mean?
Honorable Harry Teague, who's also the architect on the project. So again, this is second reading of ordinance number 8, series of 2018. This was previously reviewed by the new council at first reading a couple of weeks ago. As a reminder, we're looking, just to remind you what we're doing here, we're looking at a lot that is over 10,000 square feet in size. It's currently improved with a single-family residence, and the applicant is requesting special review to construct a new ADU at the property, which is at 105 West Sopris. Sorry, I didn't say that earlier. The applicant is looking to demolish the existing structure on the site and replace it with a new single-family home with a detached garage at the rear and a 440 square feet ADU at the second story of the garage. So just to remind you, here's the existing site plan. We have Sopris at the top here and Tucker Lane at the rear of the site. And this is the proposed, so existing site plan, proposed site plan. So at first reading, council, you didn't really have a lot of concerns. The only thing that was really raised was regarding whether or not the apricot trees along Spur Lane and Sopus Drive are going to be maintained upon redevelopment. Staff performed a site visit and met with the applicant on site, and the applicant did indicate what they had said at first reading, which was that they are intending to maintain all of the trees. So with that in mind, staff has updated the ordinance and included a couple of new conditions. One, indicating that protective tree fencing be provided and for the planning staff to inspect that fencing prior to commencing any construction activities. And the second was really added to the ordinance to clarify that development will be subject to the sustainable building regulations in effect at the time of building permit, and that the applicant may not submit for building permit until after the effective date of approval for the application. So again, staff has found the application to meet the applicable criteria, and we do support this request for special review approval. I could run through, here's the ADU elevations, once again to remind you of what it looks like. The ADU floor plan, and this is the main house elevations. I was going to turn it over to Harry at this time, if you have anything to add to this presentation.
No, I just remind you that this screen stretches things out, and that one is more accurate.
Oh, yeah, that's right, we know that. We have heard that.
Looks like a huge horsepower.
It isn't quite as big as that.
I know.
That's
Yeah.
the panoramic version.
I know. I don't know why that happens, but everybody says that.
Yeah.
Is that all you have?
That's all.
Okay, okay, then is this,
Public hearing.
okay, so we'll open the public hearing on this application at 6:55. Is there anybody in the public that has comment regarding this application? Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing, go to council for discussion and/or a, yes, sir.
Just a comment, in full disclosure, I did approve this while I was still in P and Z, at my last P and Z meeting, so they asked me to say that.
Oh,
No, they asked you to say.
good job. You did it, you said it.
You want an ethics award or something?
Listen, man, I don't wanna be
He does what he's told.
staying above board around here, okay?
You're not getting out of a committee appointment.
That's fine,
Okay.
who's on Route I Reservoir?
Okay, where are we here?
You.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
Mayor, I move town council adopt ordinance number 8, series of 2018 on second reading.
A second.
Second.
Let's give that one to Mr. Slack. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Good job, thank you.
Slam dunk. Wonderful.
Way to go, Sarah. Gary?
You never say that, Harry. Come on. We can take it back.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye, Harry.
Such a nice day. I don't know what you're doing indoors.
Well,
Town council
we could make,
outside.
we
My
could
wife.
make it go faster if we'd shut up for a while. Okay, next item is first reading of ordinance 9, a resolution of the town amending fines, penalties, administrative fees pursuant to section 2-381 of the Muni Code of the town. Brian Mahoney
Me
again.
again. So sorry. Okay, so this is in a follow-up to, of course, not only passing the change in sales age for tobacco from 18 to 21, but also passing the tax that the taxpayers did to increase the tax on tobacco. And so what this does is really follow up on the former, which was our increased age, which was an ordinance, and put into effect fines and fees for both licensing, but then also for instances where sales are made to underage folks. And so what we did to come up with the fees, we actually were given a form, because the fees, in order to stay in compliance with Tabor, have to actually offset the effort that would go into prosecuting a case, handling the administration of licensing and those kind of things. So we feel like we've come up with a fair fee schedule, and also as a piece of information, these are also in compliance as far as the graduated offenses with our existing fines and fee schedule. So we made sure we wanted to have that consistency there. So it was Pam, myself, and Greg sat down and worked on this, and I think we've got it into a place where we're just about ready to start rolling out this new legislation.
Thanks. Rolling. This is not a public hearing, but if there's anybody in the public that would like to make a comment, please do so now. Okay, council?
Mayor, you go.
All right, Mayor, I move that town council approve ordinance number 9, series of 2018 on first reading, and set the public hearing and second reading for May 22nd, 2018.
Good job. Is there a second?
Second.
You pick, Pam. Further discussion?
Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you,
To
Bernie.
the legacy of Bernie.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. We are cranking. Next item, Resolution 10 of 2018, a resolution of the town approving miscellaneous amendments to the policy for administering town-owned employee housing units. Mr. James Lint.
Thank you. This is consideration of a resolution that would amend the town's policy for administering town-owned employee housing units. And the intent of it is to increase the status of full-time employees working within the town of Basalt, city limits, in the occupancy priorities for town-owned units. As background, under the occupancy priorities for town-owned employee housing units, they're set up such that employees for the town of Basalt get first priority for renting a unit, and then currently, government and special district employees get a second priority in renting the units. The Basalt Affordable Community Housing Committee, BAC, recommended that staff bring forward proposed amendments to the policy to promote the employees that work within the town of Basalt and putting them ahead of special district and government employees that work outside of the town limits. So we've brought forward proposed language that's attached to the resolution that does that. So it put employees that work in the town of Basalt as the second priority to town of Basalt employees. It would also give an extra week in each occupancy priority for prospective tenants to decide whether they want a unit or want an available unit. We've kind of found through the administration of the existing units that we have that the 2 weeks in each priority category is pretty tight, and it makes it difficult for people to decide to take one of the affordable housing units that is available. So process-wise, staff would recommend asking staff of any questions that you might have, providing council discussion. It's not a public hearing, but you could certainly take public comments if you'd like. And Bach and the town staff support the proposed amendments.
Okay, thanks, James. I will just ask if there's anybody in the public? You're not here for that, okay. Council? Questions? Comment? Jennifer?
I'd like to know, so Judy Tippett was our administrator of the Affordable Housing Program. Who is or will administer the program going into the future?
Well, we're talking about that as we speak internally, so we haven't quite landed on anything, but we may, James, I believe he's been part of the discussion so far, and so it shouldn't be a surprise, but he does all of the qualifying for the other affordable housing program that's not town-owned units, and so we may work with him to do that qualification, just because it's a part of his duty and already, and he's really familiar with it.
And so with the second part of that, is there an administratively different, besides running newspaper ads, to putting it out to the public versus the special districts and government entities? I recognize that they have administrators within each of those categories. Will it be a further burden on staff?
I don't know if I fully understood that. So as far as the method by which we put the word out, so right now it's contemplated newspaper.
Right.
And so you're saying, is there like maybe another more efficient one, or?
Not so much. Is there more time on a staff perspective to administer going through the newspaper and changing the structure?
Susan has something behind your back over
Oh,
there.
she does? Okay,
Yeah.
yes. I'm sure, I figured she would, so yes, great.
So currently, all we do is we send out an email to everyone who's on the government special district list. And actually, the planning department does that now, okay? And we never get to that general applicability piece of it. So this changes that. It says we're gonna put it in the newspaper. Doing an ad in the newspaper, and we thought we'd, put it on our website. Honestly, that isn't a big deal. And right now, our contact is with individuals. It's not really, when we do it with the special districts and once someone's interested, we don't really deal with Picken County at that point. Picken County's role is just to disseminate the information. So I don't think that part of it is any more work than today, really. The additional piece is doing an ad instead of sending the email notice out. And one of the reasons that this really kind of came up is that it never gets to a normal business owner in the town of Basalt. Because the need for affordable housing is so great, it gets picked off right away by other governments. And so this is a way of really kind of getting at the employers in Basalt and their housing needs.
Okay.
So it's not one
And maybe to add to that answer, we have 18 units that the town currently owns, so we usually have one come available every, month and a half, so it's not frequently
Sure.
turning over.
So then on that, the final on this line is, what will the cost be for advertising? I see just in the most recent accounts, the check register, that we've paid to Aspen Daily News $158 for advertising. There's a variety of different Aspen Daily News, Capital Outlet, etc. What will the cost be for advertising this if it is going to be every month and a half, running an ad for 3 weeks?
I think a public notice, a general public notice, is usually somewhere in the range of, $40 to $50, so probably $40 to $50 every couple months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's for the 3-week run, or is that $40 for 1 week?
That's for 1 week.
Okay, so around $120 each time we turn over a tenant,
Yeah, probably, that's about right.
if
Yeah.
it doesn't go to the
Yeah.
town, et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing on an earlier comment, if, let's just say, prior to making a final decision about keeping the management of our affordable housing in-house, I would like to have it just come back to council again for another just quick discussion. We've got some new heads in here, and, not all of us were totally comfortable with having it be in-house, and maybe just looking again at the pros and cons of having people do it, who do it for a living versus landing it on somebody else's back inside. I just
Sure.
want to talk about it.
Yep.
Okay,
Bill has a question.
Katie, then Bill?
Just help me clarify, with this change, do we prioritize a SKICO employee over someone in our fire and police? Picken County, Eagle County, please.
If they had a primary office location within the town of Basalt, it would.
So like an Eagle County, police officer, which would be not the town of Basalt, they would have less notification and priority as opposed to someone who's working in that SKICO building?
Yes, because their main office is out in Algebel area, so you're correct there.
They still have to meet the eligibility requirements on income.
And that's the second piece that I'd like to, may I ask a question?
Sure.
What is category 3,
Okay, category 3 equates
income and asset?
to 120% of area median income. So that is going to be, for one person, 78,000 basically.
And how about for assets?
For assets, that's based on, so that's in the $400,000 range.
Okay.
Katie, more? Did you have more?
No, just a general comment that I understand what we're trying to get at, but I guess it really kind of rubs me wrong that we would prioritize a business that is so large and has its own significant funding sources to provide housing versus government employees that provide essential services to our community. I just kind of feel like that is our priority for housing. That's,
It kind of came up, really because we're getting this 3-bedroom, the timeliness of it was really because we're getting this 3-bedroom unit. And, we were really kind of struggling with a lot of the housing is going to like the Picken County Airport, to school districts, people that really have invested, like the school district, in housing, yet we're not getting to, we never get to that layer of housing any of the Basalt employees, like if you work in Whole Foods or City Market. And so that's what we were kind of honestly struggling with. If we wanted to do this and then come back and say, well, what's an essential employee? I get your point. It was just kind of struggling that, with where the housing was going. Just because there's such a big need, it doesn't get to Basalt.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, I also view it as a government and taxpayers subsidizing for-profit, really large organizations like Whole Foods, City Market, and Ski-Co. I mean, maybe if we could like support like our smaller local businesses obtaining and supporting staff versus behemoths that have massive funding sources and should be able to provide housing outside of government subsidies.
Well, I think this conversation could be longer. How about Bill Bingen?
Fully on board, James, with the objective and embrace it fully. The notion of affordable housing is one that I heard throughout the campaign period. Prioritizing for full-time employees within town limits, frankly, I think it's good that we provide housing for enterprises. Whether they be big or small, we all need the workers who will create the businesses that flourish. The things that doesn't make sense for me, however, is if we have to extend the time period, that tends to suggest that there is insufficient expression of demand in the first 2 weeks, so we need a third week. And that just seems inconsistent. The other observation, we own 6 units up in Snowmass. If I'm not mistaken, Snowmass does not vote in the town of Basalt. So that also seems to be an inconsistency to me, that we are providing affordable housing to people who don't reside in Basalt.
That's on our list of housing conversation.
Yeah.
So with that, the properties in Old Snowmass, that was a trade, and we really didn't have a hand. We could have taken cash in lieu, which wouldn't have equated to that. And it was seen at the current time that it was a good housing opportunity. And part of, for example, the Old Snowmass is, who does the town of Basalt want to ally ourselves with? And that's an important to consider as well, of who we prioritize. Other governmental agencies, they are meeting affordable housing and investing tremendously into it. And I feel by reciprocating the priority to those employees of those organizations, that's a win-win, or it's a kindly, neighborly, civic program to do. And I'm personally more interested in maintaining the way that it was, having part of the BAC, sitting on that commission and looking this over multiple times. I understand where it's coming from now. But again, it's one of those of, we can keep changing this around, which I appreciate BAC bringing this to us. And on the other hand, I think it's pretty good how it is.
But I guess I have another observation which I would refrain, just responding to the notion of taxpayer subsidized housing. My understanding is that this housing is full cost recovery. We are not spending money for the purpose of accommodating people there. If that's not the case, then that definitely changes kind of the philosophic outlook on this. If it is full cost recovery, but if the rents are simply capped, rent controlled, that's very, very different. If they are still affordable, but nevertheless more or less market rate. So is the town spending money for the purpose of accommodating people in these? That wasn't my understanding from.
No, at the end of the day, with what rent that comes in and then the debt that we're paying, no, we are not losing money on this
That was my
investment
understanding.
overall, yeah.
But
But the initial purchase comes from
But, right, it is subsidized in the sense that it's purchased by the town. Putting aside this issue of whether we should own it at all, you know, I think, Katie, you're raising a good point, and maybe there's some way to say, well, who that works in the town do we want to prioritize? And it could be, you say, nonprofits or healthcare or whatever. But it does seem that if you had someone snap this up from a big business, It's like, is that the highest use of the 12 or whatever units we have? So it might be something that could be tweaked relatively easily in the language here, but I think it's a reasonable point.
Well,
Yeah,
sorry.
wait a minute, did you have your hand up, Jen? I can't remember, Gary.
Well, getting back to Bill's point, question about the time, the extra time needed, you know, I'm just not clear why we're making the change, because I mean, I'm still not clear about the fact that the need is always there. We rent these things at a category 1, category 2, or category 3. So why are we giving one extra week?
Well, kind of our experience as staff with the people that are looking to rent, the prospective tenants, they've had difficulty acting in a 2-week time frame. We've had a lot of interest and demand, and ultimately somebody picks it up in that time frame, but it puts a lot of stress on their ability to do that, is what we've seen as staff.
So I mean, I know we don't have all day and all night, but I wouldn't mind spending a little more time, or Bach or staff spending a little more time on the tweaking issue of maybe it's for small business, nonprofit employees rather than just full-on free market.
Like Amazon.
So could we send it back to them just to,
I would,
are we comfortable with that, or do you want to?
I mean, I'm not comfortable on this answer, so.
So we bring it back.
Can we take it back and just, and maybe just fill them in on what this discussion was about? Really? Is that really what we want to do? Jen?
In previous Bach discussions about this, I'd like to not see healthcare included in, if it does come back to council. We've had this discussion in the past about hospital workers, and the hospital has not done an active role in purchasing and providing affordable housing for their staff, and the staff there in many cases is highly compensated. But I understand that there is that graft of, it is an expensive place to live, but you're also choosing to work at the hospital. The way that it works is many of the employees are actually not employees, they're consultants, and the consultants have a difficult time finding work, and this is not the highest use of our affordable housing.
Do you feel like you get enough of a
I think we've got
lack
some good
of comfort level to take it back?
I think we've got some good discussion points, and if you have any other ideas, why don't you share, because we're meeting this week, so if you have any other ideas.
One quick little thing. The, you know, the intent of this is right on, and the 3-week extension favors that first priority, so it's getting at what we're trying to do. And then I think, you know, what this seems to be saying is, hey, we'd rather have someone who works in Basalt in some capacity than someone who's working for another government entity in Aspen. We're trying to prioritize that. So I think that intent is great, and we ought to do something, but it needs some tweak.
Yeah, I think it's all been kind of flagged.
Helpful.
Do you want a motion to
Yep.
continue, or just?
A motion to continue would be good to the next meeting, that'd be fine.
I'd make a motion to continue resolution number 10
Do we need to send
to
it
May
to a
22nd?
date certain?
Or do you
No,
want
that's fine.
Is that good enough?
Yep, 22nd. Yep.
Okay. Katie was second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Yeah, that was just not that easy, as it sounded. Okay. The next item is first reading of, I lied. It's an executive session.
No, I think
Oh,
we have one more. Yeah.
Okay, and, okay, hold on. So ordinance 10, an ordinance of the town adopting miscellaneous amendments to the Basalt Community Housing Guidelines, which sounds almost the same.
Different topics here.
Okay.
Same issue, different issue. Same issue, different guy.
James.
It is consideration of an ordinance on first reading that would approve miscellaneous amendments to the community housing guidelines. As background, the town's community housing guidelines currently have provisions for retirees to live in deed-restricted community housing units in Basalt without meeting the requirement of 1,500 hours of work per year in the valley. as long as they worked in the valley at least 10 years prior to retiring, and as long as they volunteer at least 1,000 hours per year. The provision was put in place in the community housing guidelines in 2009, and it was as a result of work that a committee of citizens and counselors at the time that were looking at affordable housing issues. The intent behind it was that if a retired individual was to occupy an affordable housing unit, that they were going to be vested in the community by volunteering 1,000 hours a year. And so it was included in the guidelines. Recently, in reviewing the Basalt Vista amendments that the council saw 2 weeks ago, the Basalt Affordable Housing Community Housing Committee, BAC, recommended that staff make some adjustments to the retiree provisions, and the adjustments that they wanted to make, they liked the concept of the volunteer requirement, but they thought the 1,000 hours a year was too much and pretty tough to meet. So they suggested staff propose some amendments that would reduce the volunteer hour provisions. So there's a sliding scale that's proposed in your draft ordinance, which basically says that it would require 500 volunteer hours for people that are 65 to 70, and then 250 hours for individuals that are 71 to 75 years old, with no requirement beyond 75 years old. And then it also has language that would allow for the Special Housing Evaluation Committee, which is SHEC, which consists of different staff members as well as a couple of VOC members, to be able to waive it in individual circumstances where they don't believe individuals can actually do the volunteer provisions. So that's been included in the draft ordinance. There's also a couple of other cleanup items in the draft ordinance in the housing guidelines. Basically, there were a couple references to tables that were misreferenced in the guidelines, so we're cleaning those up. There was also a reference to a definition of area median income, which wasn't included in the guidelines. So we've included language that discusses how we've done area median income, which is basically a weighted average between Eagle County and Picken County based on the percentage of population that's in Eagle County and Picken County as part of Basalt. So generally, those are the proposed amendments. Staff would suggest asking questions of staff, taking public comments, and then providing council discussion. BAC in total recommended the changes to the guidelines.
Okay, Gary.
Who enforces this?
That's my
Well,
very question.
we haven't actually had anybody that has been a qualified retiree that has wanted an affordable housing unit since it's been in there for 9 years. We may get more requests given a reduction in the volunteer hours, but it would be on staff to require the applicants to provide documentation of their volunteer hours.
Can I just follow up on that, Joe? A question, so if can a retiree actually qualify to get into, or is it just
Yes.
to remain in it?
No, they would have to have worked 10 years in the employment area before retiring, and then they could get into a unit as long as they met the volunteer hours.
Okay, Auden, then Bill?
So this says community housing, we mean affordable housing, is that?
Well, the community housing guidelines are basically for the affordable housing
Okay.
program.
So what, and this is how many units do we have? A dozen?
15?
No,
No,
this
this
is
is for all.
not town-owned units. This is our whole spectrum of deed restricted units
Okay. In Basalt?
in Basalt.
Because my concern is, are we not basically headed down the road that Aspen got to, where they have a problem with retirees living in the affordable housing, and then you have to build more housing and so forth. And we're making it easier to retire in this housing. Shouldn't we be making it harder?
That's the question.
That's the question.
Well, and I think the other thing that was just said that I didn't realize is that it's not even somebody staying in a housing unit, but moving into a housing unit that never was in a housing
It
unit.
would go both ways. Somebody new could retire in one, somebody that was in one could stay in one.
Bill, then Jen.
Yeah, I guess I'm still confused about that part. So you're saying that a Basalt employee who is retired but who worked for Basalt for 10 years or more, but who did not live in housing, could apply for housing the day after they retired from Basalt, and they would still be eligible under first priority to encumber a community housing unit?
They wouldn't be in the first priority, no. They're further down the priority rung. In the housing guidelines, they'd be, I think, the 4th priority group.
Okay. But they would be applying for this 138 total units that we have in the housing pool,
Right.
according to the earlier thing. Okay. I guess I'm with Auden on this, in the sense of saying, if it's our 18 units, the town should have authority and jurisdiction over who goes, how long they stay, and so on. What is the scope of our authority in dictating what the private sector should do?
Well, in each of these affordable housing units, the 138 that you were talking about, we've got deed restrictions on them that have certain requirements for employment. They have requirements for meeting the housing guideline requirements for rent caps, for sale price
And so this
caps.
has just been one of the addenda to the deed restrictions,
Yes,
so to speak.
exactly.
Got it.
Jen.
Going to our other neighbors and what their learning experiences have been, it feels a little Lee Mulcahy-ish about the volunteer time. And is there any provision of where the volunteer hours need to occur?
It would have to be within the employment area, which is Aspen to Glenwood.
So that would exclude Africa and other,
That would exclude Africa.
And your place too, that you go.
Exactly.
Mongolia.
Can't go for Mongolia for a month
No.
and rack up 1,000 hours.
I want to weigh in that I feel, or it's not I feel, I think, this is a thinking thing. Thinking is different than feeling. And I feel compassion for, I really look forward to retiring. And I feel compassion for those that are retired. And I also respect the homeowners and the developers and the town who have created these 138 community housing places. With that, it's been a nuanced, and it can take the breath out of the room of Auden's question. Do we welcome this, or do we, And I feel the way that it's currently written is a nuanced way of stating, we don't need to open our affordable housing to retirees unless you really want to invest in our community. And I feel that that's the way that it should continue going forward. You can live in affordable housing if you really, really want to if you really want to volunteer 1,000 hours a year to our area. That's.
Well, I just have this is a feeling, this is a gut feeling, and my feeling is that I think it's really, really different to have lived in an affordable housing unit and worked in your community for 10 or 20 or 30 years and be booted out versus coming in after you're already retired. That tells me you already have housing. Somehow you had housing, and so I don't feel like I'm going to end up being one of those people, hopefully, but still, I feel like I have a problem with the boot the booting of someone who has been in a housing unit, because I see that coming to many people in the next 10 or 15 years. But I don't have any problem with saying you're not eligible if you're not already in. So that's my take.
And to clarify that, there's no booting in this language. It's, if you want to live in an affordable housing unit or community housing, you need to volunteer and meet, or you get
boot.
booted.
And there's exceptions too, so.
But I think one of the suggestions, Jackie, might be to look at the priorities for consideration.
Right.
Because I can't imagine ever asking a retiree to leave if they had no further onward residence. Frankly, that could be extremely distressing, particularly if they had a long history with the town or with any level of jurisdiction. So the notion of removing them after retirement, that frankly I would oppose. But the notion of being eligible after you retire when you are currently in other housing, that doesn't seem fair either. That seems to contravene the basic policy, because I agree they would have already had housing.
Yeah.
So I think,
And it's taking away an employee's place to live, is the punchline of what Auden was saying.
Right.
Yeah.
so I think, well, unless other people weigh in, I think it's pretty clear that we want to keep the 1,000 hours and that we want to clarify it, that it's remaining in housing, not you qualify after you retire
Right.
for housing. And I think that cleanup is pretty clear from everybody here, because I'm totally in favor of that.
But wasn't it 500 and not 1,000?
No,
It was going to
Not change it.
Oh.
It
They're
will
trying to
remain.
change it to go down, but I heard from people that they wanted to keep it at 1,000, but.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Jackie wanted.
Yeah.
I think, I agree, Gary. I think there's a lurking issue here, which is, hey, I'm as compassionate as the next guy for someone who wants to retire here, but are we gonna end up 20 years from now with a real problem where we just don't have the housing and it's all occupied by retirees like Aspen is starting to encounter? And so a piece of me, and I don't know if I'm right on this, but I think we should continue to pursue this. A piece of me says, hey, if you know that you can't retire in housing, then you start planning 30 years in the past and figure it out. We need something like that so that we don't end up in this exact same problem. And maybe we want exceptions for if you work for the town or the police or whatever, but I think it's a threat 20 years from now, and we're gonna be, the problem will be, hey, we need more housing, we gotta build more housing again.
Well, sorry,
Okay,
go
Katie and Gary.
When you have someone who is younger and working and they have enough heartbeats to say have a 4-bedroom condo, can they keep that in perpetuity into retirement? Or is there a contemplation of, you don't need a 4-bedroom anymore. You are now a single person, and you push them? Because
Sure.
I feel like it's really important, and talking about mental health, you can't tell someone, or in my opinion, this is your home and this is your community, and now you're old and you're not contributing monetarily, so go anywhere but here. I think that's a really sad commentary on our culture, and I don't want to be part of supporting that. And I value what you're saying. It is a problem. But is there a way to head off that problem by encouraging people that are in larger units to scoot into smaller units so that our younger population, working population, can take different units?
I mean, currently, there is with the rental side of things, because people that are tenants in the rental units are required to requalify every year, basically. And so when they requalify, there's provisions for a minimum number of occupants in a 2-bedroom unit. They've got to have 1 per bedroom. So if they don't, then they can't requalify. On the sale side, the for sale units, it's more difficult because they don't have to requalify yearly or every couple of years, because they own the unit. And so there could be a way we could think about that. There could be some policies in terms of, checking in with people every couple of years that own the for sale units and, encouraging, checking on their status and whether they have a need to downsize, sure.
And this is, this is completely off of this topic, but, there was a time where we were looking at senior housing on the south side, and if we put that in our mix, which it's never in our conversations or anything, to try to find someone to build, because, we weren't gonna build senior housing, somebody else was gonna do it. And just make that, on our radar, that we do that, so that we're not, I agree, I value what Auden's saying, but I just can't be so heartless as to say, you've been here all this time and now you're nothing to us.
And just let me clarify that I'm not necessarily advocating that heartless position.
I know.
But I do want to point out the irony, which is that we don't want growth, and we don't want to kick people out of housing once they get old. So we want growth. This is the growth issue. This is what Aspen's dealing with. And I'm really saying, let's think hard about this. And if our resolution is, well, we're comfortable with this possibility and therefore the potential need to grow even more, let's do that. But it's a really interesting, thorny problem.
The other thing, and you're just being pragmatic, but I think the other thing we could do is to say, we end up with no more than 10% of retired in community housing or something like that.
Then someone's getting the boot.
Someone else where you can't, like,
I want to be the 10% that stays.
why me? Number 11.
That's you, Slack. You're
Oh,
gonna be number
there you
11.
go.
Jen.
Mayor, I move that the town council continue ordinance number 10, series of 18 on first reading, and set the
If you're continuing it, you don't say-
continuing it to May 22nd, and I know that you heard the provisions that we would prefer to maintain at 1,000 hours, and if there is the availability to come back with a statement around a clause that this is for people who have worked a certain years of tenure within the working limits.
Or I thought it was that we, people who are in the housing now.
Yes, that are in the housing now for a certain number of years. And I want to weigh in on this, that it needs to be greater than 24 months.
Needs to be greater than what?
24 months, 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
That they have lived in the
That they have lived.
So-
Okay.
Or
Okay.
more.
Is it, anybody buy that?
I can second that.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion?
My only comment would be, it seems like it's an entire new thing. We're redoing this. It's not about 1,000 hours anymore. We're ditching that.
No, we're not.
Sort of going back.
We're not ditching that.
No, we're not ditching it. We're not changing it. So it's the point of to me, this is a go back to the drawing board, and these two items maybe are appropriate, but we're not really continuing this item.
Well,
We
they
are.
want to, yes, because they want to bring some of the other changes. Some of, they're not only just this retirement clause
Right,
change.
okay. Yeah, that's fine if that,
There's some other changes they can bring back clean,
mhm.
and boom.
Okay, so it's gonna happen at the next meeting.
First reading, and then I'll have a second reading after that.
Okay,
Because we're not approving it on first reading, we're continuing it.
right. All right, further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Whew, put us through the ringer on housing, didn't you?
No, they're
You
good
said you wanted
conversations.
policy discussion, you got it.
It's true.
It's good, we need to.
Say that, why did I say that? Let's see, we have an executive session, and here's my cheat sheet.
Keep it going.
I move that we go into, will someone make a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing, determining positions relative to matters that are or